morning, guys. We are reading The Changing Face of America, which I changed last minute because I thought this article was really interesting. The subtitle says the U.S. is becoming much more racially and ethnically diverse. How will that alter the nation's identity? The Yakima Valley in central Washington state has so many apple, pear, and cherry farms that it's known as the nation's fruit basket. It's home to more than 100 sprawling vineyards. The majestic peak of Mount Rainier rises over the lush fields and thriving orchards. In many ways, it's a picture-perfect American landscape. But this community of nearly 94,000 people is quintessentially American in another, more surprising way. The number of Latinos here has doubled in just one generation, now making up almost half the total population. Robert Ortiz, 17, has lived in that transformation. There are a lot more events and opportunities for Latinos in Yakima, says Ortiz, a senior at Yakima's Eisenhower High School, where he's student body president. Even in just the past few years, he's seen a big change. I noticed Spanish being spoken a lot more compared to my freshman year, says Ortiz, whose parents came to Yakima from Mexico about 30 years ago. People are getting a lot more comfortable. The changes in this farming valley mirror demographic trends in many U.S. cities and countries where the population is becoming increasingly more diverse. In the past 2 decades, 109 counties in 22 different states, from California to Kansas to North Carolina, went from a majority white to having populations in which people of color make up the majority, according to a recent report by the Pew Research Center. Monumental shift. Americans are becoming more diverse, according to recently released 2018 data from the Census Bureau. That diversity is increasingly spreading out across the country and touching a much wider swath of Americans. There's no question that the U.S. is growing more racially and ethnically diverse, says Mark Mather of the Population Reference Bureau. And there's going to be a really rapid increase in diversity over the next couple of generations. The Census Bureau has projected that white people could make up less than 50% of the U.S. population by about 2045. Already, people of color make up the majority of the population in 5 states, plus Washington, D.C. The same is true in every major U.S. city, including New York, Las Vegas, and Memphis. But unlike in past decades, people of color are no longer concentrated in major urban centers. They now outnumber white people in 372 of the country's more than 3,000 counties. Narrowing the picture to only the youngest Americans, people of color already comprise a majority in the U.S. A recent Brookings Institute analysis of 2018 census data shows that among Americans under age 15, white people now make up just under 50%. The shift is monumental for a nation that was founded by white English-speaking Europeans and has long wrestled with issues of race and ethnicity and engaged in highly charged debates over immigration. It has also broad implications for the country's economy, its political life, and its identity. This is an important tipping point, says William Frey, the senior demographer at the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. He describes the change as a transformation from mostly white baby boomer culture to the more globalized, multi-ethnic country that we are becoming. Several factors have contributed to the shift. First, in the past 4 decades, immigration to the U.S. has been the highest from countries like Mexico, China, India, and the Philippines, a result of the 1965 Immigration Act, which opened the doors more widely to immigrants from countries outside of Europe. Second, people of color have higher birth rates than white people. And finally, the white population in the U.S. is getting older, and older people tend to have fewer children. Social changes are also driving the shift. The number of mixed-race marriages, and as a result, mixed-race children, is on the rise. Multiracial and multi-ethnic Americans are among the fastest-growing demographic groups in the U.S., with more than 11 million people identifying as mixed race in 2018, a 65% increase from 2000. No country in the world has ever experienced such a quick and dramatic racial and ethnic change. So it's still unclear what it will mean for people of color to become the majority in a nation with a large generational divide. A younger generation that's racially and ethnically diverse, and an older generation that's still largely white. And here it says see graphs, so I want you to look at this map where it shows the population is over 50% non-white. And then over here, up at the top, these pie charts show the racial makeup of Americans under 18 and Americans 65 and older. Snapshot of change. One can see the social upheaval that accompanies this kind of demographic shift in Yakima. The Yakima Valley produces so much fruit that farmers have long had trouble finding enough workers to harvest it all. The work is delicate and difficult. Most fruit must be picked by hand. Starting in the 1940s, farmers found a willing workforce in people from Mexico, who began arriving in large numbers to fill wartime labor shortages. In the following decades, many more Mexicans came to escape unemployment and economic hardship at home. Initially, many came to Yakima on temporary work visas and returned home after the harvest. As farms expanded and refrigerated warehousing created year-round jobs, some Mexican workers stayed illegally. In 1986, many participated in President Ronald Reagan's amnesty program, offering the chance for citizenship. Their families grew and became part of the community, while workers from Mexico and Central America kept coming. And that began to change the face of Yakima. Latino children began populating Yakima classrooms, some arriving with little or no English. In 1999, Yakima's Eisenhower High School listed its student body as 23% Latino and 70% white. Today, those numbers are essentially flipped. Eisenhower's student population is 73% Latino and 23% white. I think overall in the school, the change is very evident, says Ortiz, the Eisenhower High student. More people are speaking Spanish. We have clubs that are Hispanic-based. We do events for Hispanics. And at assemblies, we do a lot more translating into Spanish. Dulce Gutierrez was born in Yakima and grew up there. The daughter of migrant farm workers, she started school speaking little English. After high school, she got a degree from the University of Washington. In 2015, at age 26, she became the first Mexican American to be elected to Yakima City Council. When Gutierrez was campaigning for office, she had a ugly experience that captures the tensions many older white residents of Yakima feel about their city's changing demographics. She was speaking in Spanish to a group of students who volunteered to hand out leaflets in mostly Hispanic neighborhoods when she heard a white woman on her porch across the street yell, "Go back to Mexico." Issues as old as the nation. Today, new immigrants from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and other regions take jobs in fields as diverse as farming, healthcare, and high tech. Indeed, immigrants have always played a key role in the nation's growth. From Scottish immigrant Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone in the 19th century, to Russian immigrant Sergey Brin, who co-founded Google in 1998. Still, the racial and ethnic diversity that new immigrants bring can be uncomfortable for people in parts of the country that have seen this demographic change only recently, says Mather of the Population Reference Bureau. It's more in areas that haven't seen much diversity in the past, Mather says, where there's this culture shock and concern about the changes that are taking place and what that might mean for our identity, our culture, and our economy. In some ways, these issues are as old as the nation itself. In the 18th century, Benjamin Franklin feared that his fellow Pennsylvanians, largely of British stock, would be overwhelmed by Germans, who will soon so outnumber us that all the advantages we have will not, in my opinion, be able to preserve our language, and even our government will become precarious. And in the 19th and early 20th centuries, a solidly Protestant U.S. was wary of the influx of Catholics and Jews. Indeed, the Irish, Italians, and Eastern Europeans who arrived in droves weren't universally considered white all the time. So who will consider themselves Latino, Black, Asian, or white later this century? With the upward trend in inter-ethnic and interracial marriages, ethnic and racial definitions may be different in 20 or 30 years. We're headed in a direction where I think the categories that we use today to classify people will become less meaningful, Mather says, because we're going to become so much of a melting pot.